Hi everyone, and welcome to this year's edition of the annual Journalism Panel Talk at the Abercrombie. My name is Sam Lawrence, and we've got Caitlin Maloney down the end there. And this year we are giving an extra special focus on investigative reporting. We have the award-winning Tara Brown in the middle here, and Colin Cosier. So Tara is, as you know, from Channel 9's 60 Minutes, and Colin's from SBS's Dateline program. We'd really like to thank them for coming along tonight and giving us our time, first of all. Caitlin and I will ask a few questions of Tara and Colin tonight. That's sort of the main program. We'll run for about 45 minutes, and then we'll give you guys the opportunity to ask some questions at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Caitlin.
So my first question is to both of you. I was wondering if you could take us through the journey of your career and what made you want to be a journalist and kind of how you've got to where you are now on Dateline and on 60 Minutes. Do you want to start, Tara?
Sure. Okay. Tell me if I bore you with detail. It is a problem. So I was a bit of a journalist, tragic from a fairly young age, relatively young age, about 14. It became my passion to the point where I went back for a school reunion a few years ago, and I was reminded by this guy, do you remember when we were in the gym? All you used to talk about was journalism. And I'm so sorry, I must have been so boring. But it was a passion that really directed me at a young age, which I found really beneficial, you know, in terms of knowing where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do and where I should focus my energy. At that time, I kind of had a real passion for words and writing, and so my dream was to be a print journalist. And my work experiences then that I pursued, really, I just loved the newsroom. I loved the people behind the typewriters. I just loved the noise, the excitement of stories. I did some work experience at the Manly Daily, which was our local newspaper at the time, and they were very kind to me and sent me out, you know, to do local stories. So, you know, the taste was there. And then, so that was my focus through high school, and then I got into, I got a cadet, I was not a cadet. I was a copy girl at the Manly Daily when I left school, my HSC year. And then I got into communications in Bathurst, Charles Sturt University. So I took that, and as I was just saying to Colin, in the safety of that environment, I majored in broadcast journalism and did sub-majors in politics and economics and a minor in film. Boring? Am I giving you too much detail? No? Okay. And then I was very lucky to get an internship at Channel 7 through Charles Sturt University. There were Channel 9 internships at that time and Channel 7 ones. I got one at Channel 7, and it really was a way of meeting people, and so I just decided to stay in touch, you know, and annoy them, really, by coming up with valid excuses. So again, they were incredibly kind, and I hope this is what you will experience as your careers start and blossom, that there are people in the industry who really want to help you and really support you, and I felt that I was. And so again, as this sort of cub wannabe reporter, I was allowed to do a story for 11am, which existed at that time on 7. And I just made excuses of going back. You know, I need a copy of that story. Why don't I come in on my weekends and start working for you? And it resulted in a job at the end of my degree. I was not an on-air reporter. I was a dog's body in the newsroom, and I was an assistant to the chief of staff. And my job was to be in there at 4am, listening to police scanners and sending crews to chase stories. Well, what I thought were stories. A lot of the very experienced cameramen were telling me they were not stories and that they needed to go home instead. So that was a challenge. So again, tell me if I'm going on too long, Colin. I want to give you the microphone.
I'm loving it myself.
Then I, you know, like all jobs and all careers, there are highs and lows. And the low for me at 7 came fairly soon, you know, after I was employed there. There were massive cutbacks in the newsroom. sorry, just before that, before the cutbacks, there were expansions, and they decided that one very enlightened producer decided that we should have a cadetship program at 7, and so he offered 3 places, and there were it felt like thousands of applicants, and they were all amazing because I could see them coming in because I worked there already, and my approach was, if I don't get one of these cadetships, which I had to apply for, then I really don't have a future at 7. So I applied for a cadetship at Wynn in Wollongong, and I was lucky to get both, to be offered both. And then a month later, there were massive cutbacks in the newsroom, and I was asked to work in the news library, and I just cried. Because not that, the news library is great, incredibly important, but it's not what I wanted to be.
They did that to the cadets.
They did. My cadetship hadn't yet quite started. They hired the other 2 cadets, which was really
brutal.
upsetting. It was brutal. So then I rang Wynn and said, "You know that job you offered me?" And I said, "Yes, but no." "Well, what about now?" And they're going, "Yeah, but no. Why would we?" So then I had to grovel, and then I got a job there at Wynn, and. I did stay nice to the people at 7, which was great because the person who had come up with the cadetship program had moved to 9 and still valued me, and 16 months later I left Win TV and joined 9 as a features reporter for a program on air at that time called Nightline. From there I'm going on too long. Is that all right now? Yeah. And from there I jumped onto a current affair. I was there for 8 years, and then I got a job at 60 Minutes. Yeah, there you go. And here we are, 20 odd years later.
All right, so I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker, and my undergrad was in film and TV, and I was the only person in my course that didn't have ambitions on going to Hollywood. I was interested in factual television. And my first job out of uni in Brisbane was with one of the only programs that was in Brisbane, and that was Australian Story on the ABC, a fabulous program. And I was taken on as a junior producer and trained up by the senior producers, and I am incredibly lucky to have had that break because the producers there were and are amazing. But that was a maternity backfill. And when that finished, I was left wondering, what am I going to do? The only thing else made in Brisbane was Landline, which is great, but it's not me, and totally wild. So I moved to Sydney, and I came and did my master's at UTS because, having worked at the ABC, I realised that the other programs I wanted to work on were all full of journalists, and I needed that credential. And so I did the Masters, really enjoyed UTS, ended up winning the Student Walkley, but actually it was the story I made that got the Walkley that was broadcast on News 24 that kind of got me a job as a News 24 producer. And so I just kind of did that. I worked as a producer there. I also worked at the Sydney Morning Herald in the video department, and I did that for a few years. And then in 2014, my then partner and I just moved to Ethiopia and freelanced. And I worked as a freelance correspondent. I was notionally Fairfax Media's Africa correspondent, but they just wrote that to kind of help me get an accreditation in Ethiopia. But it was very freelance. I worked for the BBC a lot. I worked for the Wires a lot, the AP and AFP. I produced for BBC Swahili.
In Swahili?
Not in Swahili. The Swahili correspondent talked in Swahili. But it was great, actually. Very varied experience. And I filed across all media, radio, TV, print, photos, you name it. And actually being able to do it all really helped make an income because it meant I could kind of double dip on stories, and I could file lists for TV and that for a print outlet or whatever. So that was really handy, whereas the poor print writers, which were getting paid per word, and that's all they could do, would kind of, they would have a harder time with it. Came back, had a baby. When he was 10 months old, we moved to Kenya, and I kept freelancing for a year. What else did I do? When I was back in Australia, I reported for AM and PM on the ABC. I did a background briefing. When I came back from Kenya, I think I left Nairobi on a Friday, and on a Monday I was producing on Bondi Rescue. And it was
Similarities there.
It was culture shock. I worked across a bunch of independent documentaries, and then in 2019 started at SBS, first on the feed and then on Dateline since 2019. I should say actually, before I got my job at Australian Story, I was an intern at Dateline way back in 2006. This sounds shocking. And I pitched a story in Iran, and they said, oh my God, we can't actually get into Iran. If you can get in, great. So I just trundled off as a freelancer and pretended to be a tourist and went and made a little story there. And Dateline took it. And so that was my first broadcast credit. And I was so green, my voice sounded so bad that they re-voiced it. And,
That's so
but I was thrilled to have a credit. And how about we just turn this thing off?
I think we
because
should. Buzz is really annoying.
Yeah.
Do you want me to take it?
Yeah.
Put it back here.
So these days I'm at Dateline. I'm a producer, and I shoot the stories and I report stories. So I kind of do it all. Yeah. There was a story on last night where it was from Israel, and I produced it and shot it. But the reporter was one of our political correspondents who was on a secondment, so I kind of guided her through the process for her first Dateline. So yeah, I do a mix.
Wow. If I can sort of then jump all the way back to now, I guess. Being a journalist can be extremely rewarding, I imagine, especially in the fields that you guys are in. So my question sort of is, it might be hard to narrow down, but what's your most favorite? What's your most rewarding piece that you guys have published to date?
Oh, okay. Well, last year, I reported a two-part series called Finding Yusuf. And in that, we went to Syria, northeast Syria, the Kurdish-held part that was formerly Islamic State territory, and we found an Australian man who was thought to have died. His family had a funeral for him in Australia, and we found him alive. And that was incredible because we went not knowing if we would find him alive or if we were looking for a grave. Like, we just didn't know. And but going paid off. And so I'm super proud of that. And we won a swag of awards. And but the awards don't matter. It was just finding him was incredible, and we got to break the news to his mother that he was alive, and she didn't know that. And it was emotional. Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone hasn't watched that, you all should. It's an amazing piece of journalism.
Yeah. Thanks.
And Tara, if we could...
Well, interestingly, Syria, Rojava, the Kurdish area of northern Syria, is also one of my favourite stories, where we profiled the women of the YPJ, who are the female fighters.
Sisters of Kobani?
That's right. And it was really, there had been like a magazine spread, photographic spread on these women, but nothing in broadcast media. So we were the first to go and tell their story.
Incredible.
And it was incredible. It was not the emotional type of story, the experience that you're talking of, but it was amazing to meet these women who were, were fighting really for all our ideals, and to meet with them or to actually get in was really difficult. We had to be assessed, and I think so. Even though we sort of had primary, agreement that this would go ahead, once we got there to Derek, we kind of had to be assessed again. And I think being a female journalist really helped because they were very wary. But then once we were in, and it was pretty hair raising. That we got within 200 metres of ISIS under fire at that time, and but just to see these women who were just like you and me, that they had dreams of families and education, and making their way in the world, all that was being, all of that was under threat, and that's what they were fighting for. And so it was extraordinary to tell their story. But to choose one is really difficult because, the great aspect, I think, of both our jobs is the variety that you get almost on a daily basis. And so to choose from, war zones to moments in history, like, the towers coming down in Manhattan or Bali bombings or, a story of a very, ordinary person confronted with extraordinary hardship. It's just impossible to choose and nominate. Yeah.
I back that. I mean, I often think about characters where you often think, how do you even get up in the morning? Given what you've gone through,
and knowing that I'd be like rolled up like a baby in the corner.
I'd be a quivering mess if I had gone through what they'd gone through. Exactly.
There's so impressive.
I like those stories where you meet somebody where you're just like, wow.
Yeah. And there are so many of them, really. I mean, we're lucky we get to meet them. Yeah.
We are. It's a privilege.
Yeah.
Tara, my next question is just for you, although Colin, if you've got anything to add, feel free. A big part of a 60 Minutes program is where you sit down with your interviewee one-on-one and have a chat with them and build this connection, whether it's, the parents of the victims of methanol poisoning, deeply emotional, to someone like Belle Gibson that, really tests your patience. How do you build this connection with the people you're interviewing and this trust?
I think the way you do that depends on the story and the people involved. So the methanol poisoning story, which is very confronting and harrowing, and again, those families, all of those families were so incredibly brave and strong to be able to talk. And it's just so sad to listen to. So in that case, I mean, they were very wary of doing the story. So building trust came about through pre-interviews, so chatting, talking, understanding their concerns and trying to meet those concerns in a very authentic way. And I think that's the key. I mean, I think you need to know what their concerns are and you need to meet those, but only if you can. And you can't, you really cannot promise what you can't deliver in that way. Because it backfires terribly. And, you're also human, so you want to protect these people from further hurt. Somebody like Belle Gibson was a little different, and often just the way the logistics work. I'm not always doing the pre-interviews. I'm not always building that rapport days or weeks ahead of an interview. So it really comes down to what's happening the moment you meet them. And so, again, it's about being authentic, it's about being straight, it's about saying, what is it that you want, what do I want? With Belle Gibson, it was, she was very sweet. I came into the room, she was very young and kind of, doughy-eyed, I guess. And it was all very civil, and, here was an opportunity for her and I to talk, and it made that very clear that, and, the stage in which we picked up that story, it was very obvious that there had been some untruths, and this was an opportunity to set the record straight. So that my expectation was that's what she wanted to do, and I thought that that's her expectation. No, it wasn't. No. So, that was that, and that too is a challenge because you're pivoting, in that moment. You go, oh, okay, this isn't quite what I expected, but that's okay. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
It has, absolutely.
And just to build on that, I find if people want to talk, they will, and if they don't, they won't. And you can't really pressure people that much. You just have to be authentic and straight up and tell them what you're about, and they either will or they won't.
Sometimes challenging them too. People sometimes think that they can just kind of skim the surface, and sometimes you just have to put it on them and say, I don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
You don't have to be mean about it, but it's, they've got to go, oh, okay, I better, here's my opportunity, I better perform.
Thinking more of like the pressure you sometimes feel from your bosses to like secure an interview.
Yes.
And sometimes I just think, well, they've said no. And like,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Or they don't bring you back, which is what's happening to me right now in Australia.
Yes, exactly. But I think if you are straight up and authentic, that's how you get the trust, and somebody will eventually talk to you.
Yes.
If you try and pressure or bullshit, then it's not going to work.
No.
Thanks very much. The next question I sort of had, you sort of revealed a little bit about Colin, but obviously the finding use of story, it was a big sort of story that made headlines in Australia. If I can sort of change the question a little bit, what was it kind of like then, knowing that the Australian government, they presumed that he had passed away? There's obviously rumours that had come out, but the family thought he'd passed away. What was it like then to almost defy the government and be able to find something that I guess the government and all their resources couldn't?
Well, we don't actually know what the government knew or didn't know. All we know is that the families didn't know, and after he had been declared dead, a proof of life video did get shown to the family that we know was after the point that he was thought to have died, but they gave no more information, and already that was a year later, and then went totally silent. So the family read into that, oh, there's no more good news to give. So we don't know what the government knew. I'd like to think they knew about an Australian citizen and their whereabouts, but it's never been put on record. So, yeah. After we did find him, one of my colleagues in our Canberra bureau was interviewing the head of ASIO, Mike Burgess, and he said, "Oh, it's great you guys found him." And it made us think,
He might offer you a job.
But, yeah, I mean, there's so much we don't know about that. I mean, often you'll hear that the women and children that are still held by Kurdish forces in Rojava in northeast Syria are held by the Kurds, but actually in truth, they're there because the Australian government keeps them there. The Kurds desperately want foreign governments to take them back, to take back its citizens, and it's those governments that are saying no. So that's why they're still there.
I guess then on the flip side, I know you touched on it a little bit previously, but what was it then like for the family, do you imagine? I know it's very hard to be in their shoes.
It was earth-shattering for them. I mean, the mother thought her son was dead and had mourned her son. She herself is locked up in a detention camp in northeast Syria, incommunicado from the rest of the world. The family in Australia knew nothing. Yeah, it was earth-shattering for them. I mean, like I said in the story, why is an Australian TV journalist finding this out? Why, shouldn't necessarily be that way.
Yeah, well, I guess it's a testament to how well you managed to put the story together, that you're able to find such a groundbreaking discovery, I guess.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I pass on to Caitlin?
Yeah, I know both of you have touched on this a bit already, but you've both done extensive reporting in the Middle East, especially Syria and Afghanistan. I was wondering if you can tell us a bit about your experiences reporting in this region and your approach to telling these stories to an Australian audience.
My experience in Afghanistan was to be embedded with the US forces. The Australians were involved, well, we weren't able to get near the SAS, of course, but the Australians were involved in training the Afghan soldiers, and when we first became embedded, it's kind of what, you careful what you wish for kind of scenarios, because you go to cover wars, but you don't really want to be caught up in it too much. But then you're desperately seeking something to justify going and to tell the story you're trying to tell. But being embedded with the US forces for a while, for a frustrating couple of days, involved checking out hydroelectricity schemes, which meant going off to creek beds and seeing what the fall of the water was. And, it's not going to work, guys. and so that was a very frustrating process. So you're expecting to go to a war zone where it's really hectic, and it wasn't, and that was very frustrating. And then it was about building trust and rapport, and then we were able to get very close again to the hot spots, if you like, and making it relatable to Australia. I mean, we had forces in Afghanistan. I mean, it's interesting how fashion perhaps changes a little bit within media, but on 60 Minutes, it wasn't always necessary to find an Australian angle. It was an assumption that we are doing a world event that Australians are interested in. So it didn't, a lot of our stories didn't need that excuse, if you like, or that reason for being. And I guess you just try and tell it like you tell any story, where it's engaging and interesting and factual. So, yeah. And I think perhaps the great challenge is in places like that, there's a lot of complexity, and trying to not simplify but make it manageable for an audience that's perhaps not as educated about that particular issue is always a challenge, whatever the subject, but you always also want to do it service. So that's always the hard part, isn't it?
Big time. You have to think, what will my grandmother think watching this, and what will she need to understand this story?
Yes.
And
but by still being respectful
Absolutely.
to how complex it is.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah, it's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you can give the audience the benefit of the doubt and kind of put in something, of substance, but you just have to make it digestible,
Yeah.
and that's kind of part of the craft, isn't it?
Part of the challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a similar experience embedded with the Australians in Afghanistan. I went there in 2012 when I was at the Sydney Morning Herald. And my story was to look at, Australia's mission at that time was to train the Afghan National Army, but because of what were called green on blue attacks, Afghan National Army troops shooting Australians, there was no trust. And so I was exploring that. But that was what I had arranged with Defence in Canberra, that I would cover. But when I got there, they were like, here, cover a story on bomb dogs, or do this or that. And I was like, guys, like, no.
No, this isn't going to cut it.
Yeah. I mean, I hear that the Americans are better than the Australians. The for embeds. The Australians you get wrapped in cotton wool and it's hard to get access to anything.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting personally just to sort of see these soldiers up close, and there were definitely tears of soldiers. There are people there who were trying to get out of the rut of Middle America, and that's how they termed it. That this was a job for them, and it gave them a future. They could pay for their kids' education, but they knew nothing about the politics. They didn't care. You met up with guys who were clearly on something to keep them awake, and they were scary, and they had no love at all for the Afghan people, including little kids. There was no regard. And then you'd meet the more senior, the colonels, or whatever the senior rank might be, and they were completely different. They were very much about meeting with the warlords and meeting with the each head of the village, and understanding and educating and being respectful of culture. So it was actually quite an interesting education.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I was actually in Afghanistan last year. We went to investigate. We were the first Australian journalists to go to some of the alleged SAS war crime sites. And, the thinking there was, Tara's colleagues at Nine have done incredible reporting on the allegations against the special forces in Afghanistan. But because of access issues, a lot of that reporting had been done remote, like using local journalists in country to go and meet people. But precious few people, if any, had been to some of these war crime sites. So we were like, well, let's do that. And we worked with a freelancer who had, an Australian freelancer who had good access in Afghanistan. And we got the blessing of the Taliban to go to Uruzgan and do this. And it was going well until it didn't. It was going very well until we were about 20 kilometres from Darwin, the site of the famous Ben Robert Smith cliff kick. But it's all in the story, but we got stopped by the Taliban secret police, we got interrogated, we got held for the night, and then we got kicked out of the country. All made great television, but kind of
Pretty light on for the Taliban.
yeah. Look, it was a misunderstanding. They're not good bureaucrats, it turns out. Yeah. Particularly when you get into like Uruzgan is a very remote, conservative, difficult province. Yeah.
Cool, thank you so much. The next sort of question I had, keeping on the topic of war zones, unfortunately, is what sort of dominated the headlines the last couple of years has obviously been what's undergoing in Gaza. I sort of wanted to flip the question though, in terms of journalists and their practice. So journalists have often been under quite a lot of scrutiny for their reporting in Gaza and in Israel. So how do you sort of navigate, not just in terms of that issue, but wherever you've sort of been in conflicts, balanced reporting, and trying to be as objective as you possibly can be?
I guess, I don't know how fulsomely I can answer this, but I guess being aware is the first safeguard. That sometimes sometimes you actually have to make compromise, if that makes sense, to get access anyway. You perhaps know that you are in the company of somebody who has a particular bent or a particular view, and that's the only information you're getting. And I guess it becomes an editorial decision whether you do that, being aware that there's another side to it, and then it's about doing your best to furnish that, or to question, to be up on your knowledge, so you can then question the person who's feeding you the information. Does that kind of answer what was?
Yeah. Colin, do you have a take on that, I guess?
Yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter where you are. Like the basics and the standards still apply, right? Like you are upfront about who you are and what you're doing, and you interview a range of people and try to get a range of views, and you question and check. And so, like, kind of Warzone or Sydney, you're kind of applying the same basic tests.
There are circumstances where you can't, like you're putting somebody's life at risk. If you were to, there were times in Afghanistan, and there might even be instances now where to interview a woman would be putting that woman at risk. So you're
making informed choices.
That's right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, last year we were in Uruzgan province with the blessing of the Taliban, but we had Taliban minders, and we didn't feel like it impacted the story because the villagers that we were talking to live under Taliban rule, and honestly, they were just happy that somebody had come to hear their story, and they would tell it to anybody. So I don't feel like in that instance, the testimonies that we heard were flavoured in any way.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah.
I've been, quite a while ago now, I was in China, and we were completely guided everywhere. But it became, it was just so obvious and so annoying that, you ended up just doing a piece to camera saying, there they are, just behind me. You made it very obvious what the situation was. So it becomes the story in itself in some cases.
Cool, thank you very much.
Colin, you touched on this briefly, talking about finding Yusuf, but I wanted to ask, with some of these big international stories, especially where Australian people are involved, what role do journalists play where the government hasn't acted?
Where the government hasn't acted? Well, I can only really talk about specific stories that I've worked on, but I guess Finding Yusuf is a prime example of that.
Yeah.
As I said, that the women and children and the men are all there because the government hasn't said we want them back, and the Kurds will only release them if a government says you can come back. Though there was a story last week about 6 Australians, 2 women, 4 children, that made their way back. They were in the Al Hol camp, so there's 2 camps where the women and children are held. they were in one of the camps that was right on the border of the Arabic area, the Kurdish Arabic area, and they were, as I understand it, able to arrange for smugglers to take them through the Arabic part to Beirut and then home. You can't do that in the Kurdish area. It's just not an option. So, but to go back to your question, I guess that's kind of why we went. One, to find a missing Australian, but two, to look at a story of Australian citizens that have been forgotten about and kept in, let's face it, mass indefinite detention without trial or charge, and they're kept there by the Australian government.
Even the Americans are pleading for Australians to take their...
The US State Department has been out front on this, saying it's more of a security risk to leave people, bring them back and control people with your own resources. Don't outsource it to a non-state actor proxy force.
Tara, anything you want to add about journalists' role and foreign correspondent reporting and government accountability?
Well, I think, that is one of our roles as journalists, whether it's Australia or elsewhere, to act for people who can't make those agencies accountable. We do have a role in doing that, and we often have a greater success because we are the media that, they perhaps will talk to us, whether they're trying to give us an excuse or an explanation. So you are sort of armed with the needs of those families or that individual. Sometimes it's about governments not acting. Sometimes it's about why did you act?
Yeah.
Why did you do that? And if it's an opportunity to set the record straight, then we should. It's a good thing to take on.
Thank you. I finish the question? All good? I think the other aspect for us sitting in the room is we probably don't really understand exactly the dangers, I guess, of reporting in a lot of these zones. You talked about reporting in Africa and the Middle East and China. So I think that's probably my other question. How do you sort of navigate that to make sure that you're still getting the best story possible for your employer, obviously, but also trying to make sure that you're still safe as well?
Well, I think the first thing you should do is make sure you have a really good fixer. I kind of don't feel like I'm a foreign correspondent. I have the, I think I've kind of got the best of both worlds, that I get to do lots of international stories and I get to go to, international destinations, but I have the comfort of home. So I'm not fully immersed in a place, and therefore you don't, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but you don't know then all the subtleties and sometimes very hidden dangers that are real. So having a fixer who is immersed, who knows the place, is really, really critical. And I mean, I think sometimes we're very lucky. Perhaps we don't know all the dangers we're facing.
Yeah.
And that probably keeps us safe in some way.
Do you guys know what a fixer is? You all do? Heads no? So a fixer, it's just a kind of term we call for basically a local journalist or a local person that we employ, speaks the language. Usually the best fixers, I think, are journalists themselves who have an excellent contact book, know the space that you're reporting on, know the people, know the authorities, and they become a crucial member of your team. We say fixer, but really they're a producer, like they're part of the production team. And and it's not just translating; it's they're kind of your in to a country and a story.
Yeah, and they can, even in India, on a very benign story, in what seemed like a really benign spot, the cameraman that I was working with, so we had our team, but then a local cameraman as well, who was attached to the local fixer or local journalist there, and he could read the situation, and he just got me out of there straight away. He said, "There's a mob potential here, I was completely oblivious to it. And you're not stupid about what you do, but sometimes you just don't see those signs. Places like Rojava, we had security with us, Australian security. In Afghanistan, we didn't. Had the US forces to look after us. But it is, again, about being aware. And you're not just aware of yourself either. You have to be aware of your team.
Yeah, absolutely.
You always watch your cameraman's back.
Totally.
I mean, I know that's your own back.
It's hard to do it all. I'm not a fan of security because I always think that if you are in trouble overseas, it's the well-connected local that's going to get you out of trouble. And
there's no way we would have been allowed to go.
There's that as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to. You have to. You don't have a choice.
And that's another challenge. I don't know about SBS, but we're increasingly finding that insurance and human resources is, that we're really becoming risk averse, which makes it really difficult.
Big time.
Yeah. So
the one time I really liked security was when I was reporting in Ukraine, and we had an ex-British soldier with us, and he was trained in the kind of classical warfare that Russia was engaged in, and it was like, great, you're perfect. You know about artillery, you know about this and that, and so, but yeah.
We found, just to defend our security team in Syria, the women loved our security because they could talk guns, they had tactics going, like it kind of was an in for us.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the fact I was a woman, but it was interesting. Yeah. And it's not, we don't do it very often, but it was interesting. Yeah.
To your question though about safety, I mean, fixes, like you just, even before going somewhere, you call somebody up, you talk to a range of people over there and you get informed and you find out. When you think about war, you think it's really dangerous, but actually a lot of war zones are really boring. Like when I went to Ukraine, friends and family were like, oh my God, you're going to Ukraine. It's like, but when you're there, you realize you have to really go looking for trouble. Like you have to be within 10 kilometers of the front line to be within the artillery range. And yes, a missile gets lobbed in once a week, but imagine a missile going into somewhere the size of New South Wales and Queensland, and it, every second week it hits a substation outside of Tamworth. You know what I mean? Like you'd be very unlucky. And if you just talk to locals, you can kind of get that sense of what's dangerous and what's not, and what's actually a real risk.
On the flip side, I think Tara, you spoke about it a little bit. How do you sort of find your employer, the institution behind you? Do they? I know it might be a bit hard to sort of touch on all of it, but are they always there? Are they always backing you up? It must be quite hard because you're so far away from Australia as well.
Was that to Tara or me?
You go.
So we have daily editorial check-ins and we have security procedures where you check in at certain times, and if you don't check in, that triggers a whole bunch of other kind of follow-up processes. But I mean, we do that whether it's a hostile location or not, because whoever's in the field reporting, we have a close editorial connection with our bosses, just so we can talk story, what's working, what's not, So yeah, it doesn't really matter where you go. That's the process. Thanks very much.
Can I ask one really quick question before we hand over to the audience? What advice do you have to students, especially students who want to go into international and foreign correspondent reporting?
Want to go?
I would say work in Australia first and get a good grounding in journalism, like actual working day-to-day journalism. Doesn't matter where that is. Cadetships are wonderful, but I know a heap of people that have gone and worked in regional newsrooms, and they speak so highly of that because you get to do absolutely everything. You're not just a cog in a wheel in a metropolitan newsroom. You do it all. And so when I went and freelanced in Ethiopia, I already had a pretty solid foundation, and then that meant that when I was over there, I knew how to walk the walk and talk the talk, and I got work. And I went somewhere where there weren't many freelancers. I mean, I chose Ethiopia because in Nairobi, the Foreign Correspondent Association was like 400 strong and there were hundreds of me there. In Ethiopia, we'd be lucky to get 6 correspondents around a table. And
the coffee's good.
excellent coffee, yes. And so I got a ton of work. I got a ton of work because journalists or filmmakers or anyone would call me up and say, I was supposed to be there yesterday. I haven't got my visa. Can you do my story? And I'd be like, yeah, but I'm going to charge you 3 times as much.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my advice. I mean, but you need to know what you're doing before you go off to somewhere overseas. So it's do it responsibly.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I completely concur with that. I mean, the great experience from not, ending my cadetship at 7 and then going to WIN was exactly that. It's about, you go from, please let me show you that I can do this, to, oh my God, I've got to do this. And you're doing 3 or 4 stories a day. And even though you are producing sausages, what the greatest thing about that is that you get the confidence to say, I can do it. I don't have to prove it to anyone, especially not myself. I can do it. Maybe this is my career path, And then, as Colin said, there's really no difference between, when it comes to the journalism, there's really no difference between reporting in Australia or reporting overseas. You have layers of differences, layers of challenges and nuances and things like that. But the skills are the same, and the skills are integral to being able to be a good foreign correspondent or a good local reporter.
Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you both for that. Does anyone in our audience have questions? I know. Oh, okay, we're going to cut first. Ned?
When it comes to foreign correspondence, and Colin might be able to answer this better, when you say you're freelancing and going over to a foreign country where you don't have connections, what is the steps to finding a good story? Is it relying on a local fixer, or is it just going out and meeting people and seeing what they have to say? And how can you go through that process in what I assume is a foreign language in a completely foreign country?
Yeah, good question. So usually a phone call to a fixer or somebody in the country that's connected to the story. Sometimes you might have just read something, it might be existing coverage, and you call up the journalist that did that story and you say, hey, that was incredible. How did you do that? I'm looking at moving it forward in this way. Can you connect me with the people that you worked with? And that's how you find a fixer. Or they might put you in touch with talent or an organization or somebody. Yeah, I mean, when I did move to Ethiopia, that was just, a Hail Mary move. I had the phone numbers of 2 editors, one at Reuters, one at the Associated Press, and both of them said, just let me know when you're there. Don't bother me beforehand. So that was that. Not that I'm recommending that, but but for doing a story, you do your research first. At Dateline, we run off the smell of an oily rag. We only have a very short window to go to a country. We can only afford to be somewhere for a certain amount of time. So we are thoroughly researched. We've pre-interviewed as many people as we possibly can. We know what our talent say on a certain topic. We also know that sometimes you just have to be live to being somewhere if something's unfolding. The story we did in Israel recently, we knew certain elements of the story would line up. We had arranged for the Australian-Israeli guy that ran Nippers on the beach in Tel Aviv. We had gone to interview him, but we of course didn't know that we would, some random people on the beach would just come up and start talking to us because they knew that we were Australian and they wanted to get something off their chest. So, yeah, but to answer your question, thorough research, hitting the phones.
Kirsten, do you want to ask?
Yeah, so this is a question for Colin. I know you said when you moved to Ethiopia, you said to get a good grounding in journalism in Australia, but how did you, apart from getting the stories, how did you end up getting the work as a freelance journalist? So I suppose just for students who are going down that path.
I guess because I already had a good career behind me in Australia and a track record of work, I could prove to employers that when I pitched a story, I could back it up and deliver it. And then when they were happy with that work, you'd get more and more and more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Tara touched on it before. A lot of it's about relationships, the people that you meet. You establish a good relationship with somebody, and I think relationships are key in our industry, don't you?
Yeah.
It's about the people that you know and who trust you, and yeah.
Always the same. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Well, it's who you know, but they're putting their reputations on the line if they hire you. So it's who you know, but you've got to come with the credentials or be able to prove it. That's right.
Yeah.
Bakula?
Yeah, I just have a question on journalism as a whole in 2025. We see constant attacks on media. We look at Trump and America and the media landscape. What do you think the role of journalism is in 2025 as opposed to when you first started? And what do you think of the likes of more independent media coming into the industry, things like that?
I think that in 2025, in my role as a journalist, in where I work, I think it's reinforcing that the information that you're getting is researched, is verified as much as you can, that the sources are real, that you can rely on this. You might have your difficulties with the subject matter or how it's told, but that certainly the ambition and the aim has always been to be factual. It's not fake. You want to be the real deal in a world where increasingly things are fake. Obviously independent voices and independent journalists or Joe Citizen journalists are increasingly listened to and are important. But I think it's on them to also have a level of responsibility and understanding of what they're delivering is really important and therefore should be onerously checked and correct. Or it should be up to the listener to understand that. I guess that's my frustration, is that or my wish, I guess, is that the audience wants to be discerning and that they can see the difference and that they become demanding of their independent voices, that you're telling us what we need, not what we want to know, but what is really happening.
Kind of a quick follow-up. I wondered, has the way in which you tell stories now changed as a result of the audience maybe sometimes being a little bit more guarded in receiving information from and less trustworthy?
I don't know that telling, like the structure of the stories or the actual telling of it, it's possibly harder in the making of it. That perhaps I came to a program that has a huge heritage and legacy, and so, I mean, unless you're completely terrified of 60 Minutes, you want to be on it, right? That's what it was like. And that has shifted, and not always, but some days it's harder than others to convince people. And that's sometimes because it's easier to do it elsewhere. It's faster, it's less onerous. But yeah, our stories have changed, there's no doubt about that, but I think that's more about being part of a news cycle, and there are great benefits to that, and then there's great, I don't know, it makes me sad sometimes. And the way the world has changed with COVID, and we're still wearing the effects of that. But it means that some of those stories that might not have an on-air time frame, you don't have to get it on next Sunday night, we don't do as much because of the cost of travel, this sort of energy that we need to know exactly what's going on and what's relevant right now. So that means we're missing out a little bit on what made up part of the fabric of 60 Minutes, which is a lot of travel, adventure. There was a lot going on over the life of the program each year, and we still do it, but we have to push harder for it. We're doing more with less, which I think is true of everyone, and we still hope to be engaging and entertaining. But yeah, there are changes, and you have to evolve as well. Otherwise, we become irrelevant.
Big time. Yeah. I mean, you guys know it, like TV audiences are declining, traditional legacy media, as we're called, newspapers and that, audiences are declining. But I like to think that a good story is a good story. And when you make a good story, it resonates, maybe not in TV viewing figures, but, it'll find a home on YouTube or on one of the, on-demand platforms that you might have.
And can I also say, sorry to interrupt, but if there is a big event, like if there's Lismore floods or there's, some big news event, then legacy media comes to the fore because the community trusts. That's who they're looking for to get information they can rely on, and I find that very heartening. And I think it's real. Despite those declining numbers, in those instances.
No, absolutely.
That's where they come.
One last question. Sorry, I don't know your name.
I'm Maddie. Thank you both so much for tonight. You're really inspiring journos, and thank you for your service to Australian media. I'm just wondering, because a lot of us here tonight are going to be graduating soon or are recent graduates. I'm sure we're all going to be met with a lot of rejection and a lot of trial and error with our own practice. And often with successful people, we hear about the successes. So I was wondering if either of you or both would be comfortable talking about maybe rejection or failure you've experienced, and more specifically how you overcame that, especially in a practical sense, not necessarily in a be resilient sense.
Any failure? No.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking back. So after my film degree, I interned at Australian Story, and actually on day 4 of my internship, the Beaconsfield mine collapse happened in Tasmania. And the EP, the boss of the program, said, "All right, producers, who's going down?" And everyone kind of looked at their feet. And then one of them said, "Hey, Colin, you can shoot, can't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, why?" And I was on a plane the next minute, like heading down there. And so like day 4 of being an intern, I got thrown into this situation. So that's a lucky story. That's not really answering your question at all. That's but
that's the worst you can do.
We've got Auckland winners here, so.
But you know what? I mean, not that I advocate for this, but then when I came back, I continued to intern, and I think I interned for well over a month, if not 2 months, unpaid. And I'm not advocating for unpaid internship at all, but I really wanted an in, and so I kind of made that known. And also I was really interested in what they were doing, and I wasn't doing anything else anyway, so it was like, well, I can learn and be here. So, but yeah, I don't advocate for unpaid internships, but it worked for me.
Yeah, but sacrifice is part of the success story.
Yeah.
Being prepared to travel and live in a regional area, or go to the news library, which was a big failure for me. It felt like that.
When I worked at News 24, it actually was a bit of a shit-kicking job. Like, it wasn't great. I wasn't doing original journalism. I was churning, but it was an in. And a lot of the people I worked with, journalists out there today doing great stuff, and just use those entry-level toeholds. You know.
And that takes a bit of humility. And we all want to be superstars, and we all want to chase after the story of our dreams immediately, but don't ever be frightened of being researchers. Like, it is the most important part of journalism, in a way, getting those facts right. And we are all, as journalists, we are all researchers, but that is a role. And often I see people who come in and they just desperately want to get out of that role, and I understand why. You want to become a producer, you want to have carriage over your story, you want to be paid more. It makes sense, but they're really valued and critical roles, and so it does take a little bit of humility. And as I said, sacrifice. And also, I know this is not about resilience, it's not meant to be. But be clear that you are passionate about this, because this is a hard industry. It's hard to get into, it's hard to stay in, it's sometimes hard to stay inspired. So if you're wishy-washy about it, maybe think of something else, because life will be easier and possibly happier. It's probably not the right thing to say, but it's true. Like, really. And so if you are passionate about it and you get a knockback, you come forward again. Or if somebody's being horrible to you, you work out, am I going to leave because of that person? Is that person going to drive me out of something I really want to do? And then you find strength and you find ways. And there are, in any industry, there are knockbacks. It's just, you've got to keep knocking on the door. And, you know, you've also, I think success is probably just hanging around the longest.
Fully, yeah. No, that's great advice. And I think, yeah, you said research, but any of the entry-level jobs are a foot in the door. You know, a lot of the journalists at SBS, we only take 3 cadets a year. It's nothing. But a lot of them come through the news library. You know, they start logging footage, but that's actually a great job, because you get to know who's who in Canberra, because you have to log their faces and type down what they're saying, and it's actually a good place to start. You know.
Yeah, and don't be frightened to show that you're keen.
Yeah.
You know, really, newsrooms love energetic people, and it's not embarrassing to sort of say, I'm desperate to do that, let me do that, please. Yeah.
Amazing. That's some great advice from you both. Thank you so much, Colin and Tara, for coming and talking to us all tonight. Can everyone please give them a round of applause?